Hi there. My name is Corey Gray, and I am super excited to facilitate this race discussion on an article entitled From Classmates to Inmates, an Integrated Approach to Break the School to Prison Pipeline. So, my name is Corey. I am a PhD scholar in the Gifted and Creative Education program here at the University of Georgia, but I also am a resident of Atlanta, where I am a third grade teacher in Atlanta Public Schools. So, this work truly applies to me outside of just me being an educator, but me also being a Black male scholar who matriculated through the public school system, where I noticed firsthand and witnessed firsthand many of the policies and practices that we're going to discuss today. So we're going to do a summary of the reading, go through the reading and summarize some key takeaways, some key points. And then we're going to look at some case studies that are going to ground the work that you will engage with in regards to this study. And then we are going to look at some discussion questions to give us an idea of what the future may look like and what we envision for the future. So let's go ahead and jump into the reading. The school to prison pipeline is this construct or this pipeline where it essentially is tracking scholars out of the school building. When we think about school, we think about classes and a teacher and their scholars and boards and whiteboards, or some of us might think about chalkboards. That ages you, definitely. But when you think about that, it gives you insight on what the typical person thinks about when they think about school, but that's not the case in many instances. In many instances, other individuals think about school through the policies and the practices that have forced them to drop out or forced them to leave. And that's going to be the crux of our conversation today. There are many policies and many practices that are in place in many schools across the country through deficit mindset, through deficit thinking, that leads many Black and Hispanic males and females to drop out. And that essentially leads them to the school to prison pipeline. You'll find that statistics say that high school dropouts are 63% more likely to be arrested and to go to prison than scholars who have a 4-year degree. So when we think about schooling and how that affects our Black and Hispanic scholars, Black and Hispanic males have the lowest graduation rates among students of color. And this conduit, the school to prison conduit, can begin as early as elementary school, where some scholars, they don't feel as though they belong. It happens even with, you have scholars who are emerging in reading, where they feel as though they're not on the same reading level as their peers, and they become resistant to school, and then they begin to act out. And rather than having certain practices to help them cope and to learn and to use effective and research-based tier 1 and tier 2 instruction, we then employ and put those students in the special education system, which is a disproportionate, where we have a disproportionate amount of Black and brown scholars who are labeled as special, are labeled with special education services, rather than providing them with the supports and practices to really see them for who they are and to assist them. Similarly, the focus on this punishment, where scholars are punished for the way that they act or the way that they look, essentially, it indicates that the criminal justice system is stacked against minorities and the poor. We hear all the time that many educators, they don't see color, but when we don't see color, we don't see culture. And when we don't see color, then we're also acting in a way where I'm not seeing you for who you are. But then there are educators who do see color, and when they see the color of their scholars, they also attribute certain behaviors and certain beliefs to those scholars. When they see a Black scholar, they may innately think that they are bad, or that they are not as smart as their white peers. But again, that is not the case, because we know that intelligence and achievement is not linked to genetics. It's linked to many other aspects, which is another discussion. And there's also this disconnect between student culture and school culture. When we look at the school to prison pipeline, we think about this accusatory lens that's framed around our kids, where we blame kids for what they do, rather than take a deeper look into the structure of the school to see what policies are in play that are keeping these scholars behind, and that are essentially gatekeeping them from being able to thrive in their future. There are certain behaviors that begin to be seen as deficient and inappropriate. And when those behaviors are seen, again, we put them in the special education program, or we call the school resource officer, where many schools actually have a police officer in the building to interact with children. And again, we should, sorry, I'm sniffling, but we should have safe schools. We should have environments where every scholar is safe, especially in the climate today, where we see so many gun violence and gun shootings at schools. But at the same time, we should not have instances where scholars have, when they come in the building, they have to go through a metal detector, and we have canines walk in the building. It seems as though they are making the school have certain attributes and descriptors of what some of the prisons even have, especially when you think about how many high schools, when you walk into their classrooms, is blank white cinder brick walls. They don't get much time outside, and when they do, it's confined space. There's a lot of policies and different structures that are in place that are supporting this pipeline, and including the zero tolerance policies and the three strikes policies. These policies that are essentially saying that we have zero tolerance for certain aspects, like zero tolerance for drugs, zero tolerance for fighting, or zero tolerance for certain disciplinary actions. And once those actions are taking place, it results in a mandatory suspension or expulsion where these kids have to leave the school building. And then when we think about certain environments, especially low socioeconomic environments, what these scholars, where are they to go? Where are they to go? If they're kicked out of school, the one place where they spend a majority of their waking hours, a third of their day is spent at school, the other third of their day is spent while they're sleeping. So then we only have 1/3 of the day where they can engage with, homework and friends and extracurricular activities. But when we take that school component away, we're taking that blanket off of them where they're being exposed to this world. And the world is not going to just view them as a scholar. Some people view them as a problem, as a threat, or as a number. In this three strikes policy, where if you do 3 infractions, then you're also mandatory, like you're suspended as well. So there are certain policies and certain practices that are in play, which essentially make our schools seem like prisons, where you have to be this certain type of way, where you must be this certain type of scholar. And we think about what teachers and principals and certain individuals who are even higher up in the realm of education, when we think about what their perfect scholar looks like, it looks like a white male. So we have Black students, Hispanic students going into these buildings that were not designed for them, and they have to assimilate and act a certain type of way. And when they buck the system, essentially, they're kicked out of the school. And when they're kicked out of school, they're not being exposed to the knowledge that would then allow them to go to college or find trade jobs or do certain things that would benefit them and that's linked to their interests. So then it essentially leads them to other situations where they're not able to thrive as such. And many individuals, again, have a deficit mindset, and they link negative behaviors to socioeconomic status. There is one philosopher who talks about this alternative to these theories, where the socioeconomic background is more so viewed as strength. It is viewed as the main contributor to the poor educational outcomes, asserting that people's social standing and their related experience can actually help them achieve rather than hold them back. So when we think about the reading and what the authors are proposing when it comes to breaking and dismantling this school to prison pipeline, they present this model called the integrated learning model. And essentially what they've done is they've gone and they've found different philosophers, different studies, and they pulled together what they felt were the best practices, the most research-based practices, and created a model that will allow scholars to thrive, that will create climates in classrooms and throughout the school structure, while still leaving room for flexibility, because every school is different and every school has different scholars. So we can't have a universal approach, but we can have an approach where every scholar is seen, every scholar feels as though they belong. And family structures, social networks, aspirations, and overall experiences of scholars, they're being built upon and they are being empowered as such. So this model has four tenets along with being culturally responsive. The first of the four is focusing on equity, of environments and culturally pluralistic settings. That word is a beast. Pluralistic settings. So essentially what that means is it involves designing inclusive classrooms where all students are valued and made to feel like integral parts of the classroom culture. Every single scholar, no matter where you come from, you are seen, you are valued. We include your culture in our instruction, where It's not me giving you education, but it's us thriving and uncovering education together. The second tenet is in establishing equitable, diverse, and interdependent communities of learners. And this just really built on top of that first one, where it's an inclusive ideology that provides a framework to set up these equitable relationships among students within classroom environments, letting our students really connect with one another, and understanding that they are learners just as much as their teacher is a learner, and finding community where they don't feel as though they are alone, where they feel as though they belong into a group, and that group is one of learners. And that leads us to our third tenet, which is implementing change through critical cultural consciousness, which involves implementing change in specific practices where we change the mindset of teachers, where they confront their bias. Because again, bias may not be, we can't eliminate bias, but we can dismantle it and start to address it and lessen it to a point where it does not impede our practices as educators. And then moving forward, once we go beyond that, we then can continue to change and make our school more critically conscious as well. And the last tenet is providing access to multicultural curriculum with culturally congruent instructional strategies. So it really addresses the classroom environment with the idea that to truly facilitate this quality instruction, teachers must be highly qualified in their subject area, highly qualified, and the content must be culturally relevant, and the teachers must be skilled in designing this this instruction with multiple modalities and really understanding who their scholars are and including their identity in the instruction. So again, when we think about this integrated learning model, it really just sounds like research-based practices grounded in culture responsive pedagogy, but it's deeper and it's very intentional in a way where we must be innovative with our approach, and we must essentially have all hands on deck to really make this model something that is effective. So now that we've talked about the reading and we've gone through and really broke it down and talked about the statistics with the school to prison pipeline, what it looks like and the factors on why, and this model that can be used to break it down, let's begin to think about how we can employ and apply this model to particular case studies. So I have provided 2 case studies to you. I would like you to pick one of the case studies, and I want you to apply this integrated learning model to the case study. So how would you apply this model to where the statistics and the things that are going on in these schools can begin to lessen? So case 1 is the Atlanta High School. At Atlanta High School, the demographics are 95% African-American, 4% Hispanic, 1% white. In this past school year, there have been over 50 fights recorded. So there may have been more, but as far as the reported fights, 50 fights, over 100 suspensions, and 3 arrests. The school utilizes a 3 strikes policy and has withdrawn dozens of students for reaching their 3rd strike. So how would you use the integrated learning model to begin to dismantle and break down these things that are happening at Atlanta High School? Case 2 is a case of Jack Vasquez at Northview Middle School. Jake is an 8th grader at Northview Middle, and he is facing expulsion from the school for repeated fights and infractions of their policies and rules. He's a fluent Spanish speaker and an emerging English speaker. He transferred to this school last year and currently has a 1.4 GPA. However, at his last school, he received A's and B's and was a student athlete. Northview's demographics are 80% white, 10% Hispanic, and 10% African American. So pick a case and think about how would you apply this model to these cases of students who are essentially about to be expelled from their school. And in the case of Atlanta High School, many of them have already been. All right, and then the last slide here is a vision for the future. I've given us some discussion questions, and what I would like you to do after you finish your case analysis is to pick one of these questions as you dream and think about how to apply this model and what that looks like moving forward in the future. So based on the integrated learning model of the 4 tenets, which of those 4 tenets do you feel like will cause the most resistance in schools? And primarily, if you're an educator, it can be the school that you go to. If you are an undergraduate scholar, it could be a school that your high school, your most recent high school, or even a class at UGA. How would this model be applied, and which one, if we were to apply this model, would cause the most resistance in your course or your school? The second question is, because we know that racism is embedded in the fabric of our country and essentially cannot be eliminated, 20 years from now, if we were to apply this model today, right? If we were to apply this model nationwide today, and every country, or not every country, but every state in the country were to apply this model, what would schooling look like 20 years from today? And then I also have in point 3, what is your vision for the future regarding race, schools, and school to prison pipeline? What do you envision that schools will look like in the future? And that can be tomorrow, it can be next year, it can be 50 years from now. You decide that, but I would love to know what your thoughts are. So that's our discussion. I'm grateful that you spend the time to watch this video. I'm also grateful that you are engaging in this content. I'm looking forward to reviewing your discussion post and really understanding your perspective as you analyze the cases and you reflect. Thank you so much for your time. I look forward to seeing your responses.